just wanted to point out that neither one of these women are black. Black Americans have been getting blamed for a lot lately. And when I say black, I mean all skin folk are not kinfolk. Black is a term coined by Black Americans.
Welcome back to the Council of Memory. My name is Achila Yona. We gather now to sort what is true from what simply feels true. A clip has been circulating that insists the word black was coined by Black Americans and that black people are, by origin, Indigenous Americans. The claim has a flavor of power in return, and yes, there are threads of truth in the tangled cloth. Many self-proclaimed black families carry Indigenous memory and lineage, but feeling a truth is not the same as proving one. So many people from the Black American demographic are finding and accepting their American Indian heritage. Beautiful, love it, give me 14 of them. However, it's the constant rewriting history that has me side-eyeing everybody. The language we live under, the boxes, the columns, the check marks on forms, was made by government officials, clerks, and laws. The federal census has been classifying people since the first count in 1790, using categories that changed to suit political ends. Those categories were not born from a single community's choice. People are confusing their pride of a forced identity as a cultural fact, and I'm not going for that. Listen to the shape of this power. The United States Census and state vital records were instruments of governance long before they were instruments of representation. In many censuses, the options did not include an Indian category for those living in American Indian societies. And by the early 20th century, the government's instructions often told enumerators to mark anyone with any perceptible trace of black blood in a way that enforced hypo-descent, a legal administrative decision, not a cultural self-name. These were not neutral labels. They were tools of control. But before I get deeper into this, I'm going to show you the full video and come back with further commentary.
Neither one of these women are black. Nicki Minaj and Cardi B are verbally sparring in the pits of hell like it's a gladiator match. And I just wanted to point out that neither one of these women are black. Black Americans have been getting blamed for a lot lately. And when I say black, I mean all skin folk are not kinfolk. Black is a term coined by Black Americans. We went from indigenous people, because secret be told, black people were in America pre-Christopher Columbus. But that's another video for another day. To 3/5 of human, slaves, ER, Negro, colored, to James Brown, I'm black and I'm proud. I like to point out that Nicki Minaj was born in Trinidad. Cardi B is a second generation immigrant. One of her parents is from Dominican Republic while the other is from Trinidad as well. And remember, in the famous words of all my Dominican people, I know Black Poppy. I thought I would make this video to get some of the heat up off of Black Americans because they really was down in hell with Lil Nas X, okay? Cardi B said Nicki Minaj's son was slow. Nicki Minaj said that Cardi B's kids was monkeys and roaches. And as a Black American, we want no parts of that at all. This is a Trinidad fight. The reason why I brought this up, because Charlie Kirk got shot by another white person, so that's white on white crime. Somehow the conservatives flipped that back onto the Black American community because a few black people made comments about it on social media. Make it make sense. Also, immigrants, specifically, I live in Los Angeles, some of the Hispanic people got mad because black people didn't want to go outside and march with them when a white person sicked ice on their ass. How's that the black community's problem? We're sick of getting beat up in the streets. They've been doing that since Selma. But let me get back to my point. Leave Black Americans alone until we do something ourselves. But stop putting us in everybody else's mess. We tired. We ain't gonna fight all these fights. Stop blaming us. We minding our black business. Just like they done mentioned Jay-Z several times, and he's a black American. Guess what he's doing? He hear no evil, see no evil, and speak no evil. At least not on a public platform. Like another black American said, Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high. No, we're gonna go low too. But at least black Americans have an unwritten rule. We don't talk about nobody's kids. I'm on your ass, but I'm gonna leave your kids alone.
Let me say this plainly. This is exactly why I don't help people the way I used to. Too many folks hear catchy lines like Black people are indigenous and think that replaces real research. They cling to the word Black because that's all they've ever known. And the moment I tell them they don't have to accept the labels forced onto their ancestors, I become the villain. Suddenly, I hate being Black, when really I just refuse to let European racial categories define my identity. People know about paper genocide. They know our ancestors called themselves by their own nations and names before outsiders rewrote everything. Yet they still attack anyone who chooses to reclaim their lineage instead of repeating what the system gave us. That's not pride, that's avoidance. The truth is simple. Do your research, learn your people, and hold on to the identities your ancestors actually lived by. But many would rather argue, cling to ego-boosting slogans like Black people are superior because Black people have melanin and white people don't, when in reality, everyone has melanin. And people also follow these influencers who tell them whatever sounds flattering instead of what's real. And that's why I pulled back, because I'm not here to babysit denial. I'm here to speak facts. We have to address identity alchemy for what it is. Throughout the early 20th century, state registrars and census officials across the South aggressively rewrote people's identities on paper. In several states, clerks altered birth records, marriage certificates, and school rolls to erase indigenous classifications and replace them with colored or Black. These bureaucratic decisions weren't harmless clerical errors. They disrupted ancestral nations' sovereignty, obscured lineages, and dismantled the documented identity many communities relied on for land claims, education, and recognition. People who are not well versed on the topic of identity alchemy should look into Jack D. Forbes' work instead of talking about Walter Plecker 5011 times. I went over Jack's work on my channel before, and his research into identity alchemy of American Indians is undefeated. He showed how terms like Black were often weaponized by state systems, not as neutral descriptors, but as tools to collapse diverse indigenous nations into a single racial category. Forbes demonstrated that many individuals and families labeled Black in historical records were in fact indigenous or part indigenous. Their identities deliberately overwritten to fit rigid racial hierarchies. His work exposes how a single word on a government form could reshape someone's legal and cultural identity for generations. Those erasures were fought in courtrooms and in the archives. A woman named Rachel Finley, and another variation of her name is Findlay, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to call her Rachel Finley, repeatedly sued for her freedom on the ground that she descended from a woman of Indian extraction. Virginia law at the time made it illegal to hold Indians in bondage. So her claim was effectively, I am indigenous, therefore I am not enslaved, not to be classified as a slave or Negro. She and later her descendants pursued the courts for decades to prove that status and win freedom. This is a clear early example of an indigenous ancestry plaintiff using the courts to defeat classification as an enslaved Black woman. Dozens of freedom suits across Virginia and other southern colonies or states relied on claiming descent from an Indian of free status to defeat slave status. The Library of Virginia collection and scholarship on freedom suits document many such litigants who used courts to prove indigenous ancestry and thereby resist being classed as enslaved or black. These cases are an important pattern. Courts became the venue where race or identity was legally tested and sometimes reclaimed. Mid-late 20th century and modern federal opinions, for example, St. Cloud versus the United States, and later cases like United States versus Bruce, are not misclassification as black suits per se, but they're the contemporary legal doctrine showing courts have the authority to determine whether someone is an Indian for jurisdictional and statutory purposes. Courts apply multi-factor tests: blood, tribal recognition, social recognition, which is exactly the mechanism that has been used historically to accept or reject claims of indigenous status. Those rulings show the same legal machinery that historically misclassified people can still be used to decide identity in court. Academic and public health research traces the same pattern. Indigenous people have long been misclassified in health records, death certificates, and registries as white, black, or other, producing statistical erasure and real consequences for services, recognition, and reparative claims. The misclassification is not a clerical quirk. It's the material legacy of policies that flatten living nations into racial boxes. When we read those statistics, the missing names and the absent nations are part of the story. There are modern echoes too. Descendants of people enslaved by or associated with indigenous ancestral nations have engaged the courts and legislators over citizenship and membership. Litigation that confirms how identity in this country is often mediated by legal documents and political decisions rather than oral memory alone. These struggles underscore a painful truth. Legal recognition is conditional, and the paperwork often determines who may stand at the tribal door. And this is my issue with people that are consistently trying to force indigenous people to be seen and labeled as black. So many indigenous people and mixed indigenous people fought the courts to not be labeled as anything other than their indigenous identity. And so many of you come online and rewrite this narrative that, oh, we're black, we're always been black, indigenous people come from Africa, black people are indigenous too. And it's like, y'all are undoing hundreds of years of progress our ancestors have made with the courts. Because when these people came over here, they were quick to label us anything other than our ancestral identity. So when someone says with conviction, black is a term we coined, they are collapsing two different truths into one. It is true that self-identified black communities reclaimed and transformed the word black into an affirmation, into culture, politics, and pride. But it is not the same thing as the origin of the label as a matter of state classification. The categories you see on a birth certificate, a census, or a voter roll were created by institutions that sought to sort, tax, exclude, and control. Those categories then shaped how people were treated and how nations survived or were erased. This is not a call to divide our people. It is a call to careful memory work. I know there are indigenous people that still label themselves as black. They still call themselves black and they may see other indigenous people as black. And I get that. You are entitled to how you want to identify as. But what I'm not going to do is listen to you when you're giving out wrong information. Remember, we have children that are coming into these topics, y'all. We have impressionable young adults coming into our spaces to learn more about their ancestry. And y'all are getting on here and trying to mix all these different things together when they don't go together. Yes, there are Black people with indigenous roots. Yes, there are indigenous people that still identify as Black. However, pushing the narrative that Black Americans coined the term Black when already so many Black Americans are indigenous is crazy. It's crazy that people are continuously pushing narratives because they don't want to let go of certain labels. I close this session from the Council of Memory with a simple grounding. Names matter, and who gets to write them matters more. The term Black has been turned into a powerful banner by people who found dignity in it. But the banner did not fall from the sky. It was made in a field of documents, laws, and resistance. Paper can be a weapon. Paper can be a shield. Our work is to read both ways, to remember what the records erased, and to care for each other's history with the rigor they deserve. But anyway, that's all what the council has to say for now. I did make a part 2 of this video, so if you are a part of our Patreon council, be sure to come on by and listen to part 2. I love y'all guys. Stay safe, and until the next one, bye.